Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about some books about William Blake, and I particularly want to talk about the spirituality and mysticism of William Blake. And I wanted to talk about this today because I think it's better known about William Blake in regard to his art and his poetry. But what is not as well known is his inspiration behind his art and poetry. And I wanted to talk about 3 books in particular, and I also wanted to talk about some of the spiritual ideas behind his work. And I've got some notes here that I'm going to refer to in a moment. I just wanted to start off by saying that Blake was influenced by many things. So when people look at his art, you would see a lot of mysticism as well as spirituality. I remember the first time I saw the art of William Blake, and that was the first thing that I thought about. I thought about the fact that this is spiritual or mystic artwork. And I was puzzled by that for quite a long time. It wasn't until I got these particular books that I'm going to show you today that provided more background for me about the thoughts and the spiritual ideas behind the art and poetry of William Blake. He also wrote essays on other things as well. But what surprised me was the fact that William Blake had knowledge of Kabbalah, and Kabbalah did influence his own spiritual theory. He actually had his own kind of mystical theology that he had formed over a period of about 15 years when he, in the second half of his life. So he was exposed to the ideas of Swedenborg to begin with, Emanuel Swedenborg, and then he decided that he wanted to formulate his own spiritual ideas, his own theory. He was also informed personally by the Bible as well, but he saw the Bible from a more esoteric perspective. And I'm just reading here some notes about he actually was influenced by even Neoplatonism and Hermetic writings, Gnosticism, even alchemical writings. So all of these things, as well as his own interpretation of the Bible, were big influences on what he thought and his whole creative approach. So what I'm going to do here is talk about these 3 books, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about his theories, spiritual outlook and approach, and what he, if I could just in a moment show you a diagram. I will get the diagram for you. Here it is. For people who know about Kabbalah or different aspects of Kabbalah, there is the idea of the divine man which is really a cosmic man, and it's an anthropomorphic idea of the universal or cosmic man or human in relation to God. So this is quite well known in Kabbalah, and I mean Jewish Kabbalah. It's quite well known. So this is what I'm talking about here, and this is what inspired William Blake in his later writings, and I'll talk about which particular poems and writings that this idea comes from, how it informed his writings and particular writings. So the books I'm going to talk about particularly today, this is a great book called The Portable Blake, and it's got the very well-known beautiful illustration of Blake's Ancient of Days, it's called. It's very well known on the cover. This is The Portable Blake, edited by Alfred Kazin. And I'm just going to talk about what's in this book. It's really worth considering if you'd like to get a really good background, not only to Blake's life, but to find out a lot more about just how complex he was as a person, and he was a visionary thinker, because he was actually prophetic in a lot of his writings. And also mentioning the word visionary, he had visions from a very young age as a child, and those visions continued throughout his life. So he also had these personal visions as well as his spiritual outlook and approach to life. So these are things about William Blake that's not really all that well known. So this book talks about, it starts off with a great introduction. The introduction is just worth reading. It's worth buying the book for the introduction, because it's such a unique introduction to Blake. It's not the usual type of Blake biography type of thing that you would normally read in most books. Most books about William Blake really talk about his life in a general sense, that the fairly well-known facts about his life, but they don't really talk about his spiritual and mystical thinking, whereas this book talks about also his ideas about like, for example, he was ahead of his time. He was really libertarian in a lot of ways. So he was way ahead of his time. I mean, he had some ideas that were even before Nietzsche. So, and Nietzsche was known as quite a rebellious, revolutionary thinker. But Blake was before that, and he was really quite unique in that way. So the introduction is worth reading, and a little bit about the young Blake. And then it talks about his songs of innocence and experience. A lot of people usually know about that. So they know about his poems and his drawings before that. And then this goes on to his later thinking from the middle of his life. But the thing that I'm really talking about here are his prophetic books. It's the prophetic books that he wrote and that he illustrated. that are really about all his spiritual ideas and theories. So you have the marriage of heaven and hell, and this is a whole section on the prophetic books in this book. The marriage of heaven and hell, and the gates of paradise, which is another set of writings. Then he wrote the first book of Urizen and the book of Loss. Now, by loss, I mean L-O-S with one S, not with two S's. The book of laws, or it's probably laws rather than loss. The book of laws. Urizen and Loss were two aspects of spiritual beings that was part of William Blake's spiritual theory. Then this is around the same time, this is at the time that he formulated the idea of what he called the four Zoas. And the four Zoas are sort of a little bit like the idea of the four worlds of Kabbalah, but still different. They're really four aspects of the divine rather than four worlds. But I'm just trying to sort of do a little bit of a comparison here, so people who know about the four worlds of Kabbalah will get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. Then there are selections from the poetry from Milton and selections from Jerusalem. Now, something I want to mention here that a lot of people don't know about is his writings of a poem that he called Milton. That is the poem, the introduction to that long poem is actually what contains the words that later became known as the poem called Jerusalem, that is well known from a anthem, a British type of anthem. It's not an official British anthem, but it's or an English anthem. It's a song called Jerusalem, but the music was put to the poem that actually comes out of Milton. It got confused with another long poem of Blake's called Jerusalem, and that's how it got kind of confused that way. So that very, very well-known song called Jerusalem actually comes from the long poem called Milton by William Blake. Then you have got this is called the vision of the book of Job. Now, this is one of the best things also that William Blake ever wrote, and it was illustrated as well, all based on the biblical book of Job. This book contains the black and white illustrations, or the black and white engravings from that. So that's really worthwhile. And then there is a vision of the Last Judgment as well. And you have got, in the appendix, you have got the Blake lifeline, life chronology of his life. And you've got an index of titles and first lines of the poems. But this book, I think, is the most worthwhile one to get. I think it's a kind of a great introduction, I think. I think it's got everything in here except for colour plates, but it's got the black and white drawings from the Book of Job. So I really think this is probably one of the best. I think it's just a unique book about William Blake for people who really want to understand William Blake a lot more, especially from a spiritual and a philosophical perspective. I mean, he just had ideas on a whole range of things, but it's particularly the kind of visionary and gnostic spirituality that he had that was really unique to him. And I think this book is really worth getting for that reason. So that's that book. The next book that is really, really good for understanding the whole imaginative world of William Blake. This is called Eternity's Sunrise, The Imaginative World of William Blake by Leo Damrosch. Again, it's got the Ancient of Days on the cover. This is another great book. I was really surprised when I got this book. This has got some black and white pictures of Blake's artwork, as well as some beautiful colour plates in the middle of the book as well. It's a terrific book. This book also looks at all of the inspiration that Blake had and where the inspiration came from. It talks about, for example, it's got a chapter here, how should we understand Blake's symbols that were unique to him. This other chapter is called Atoms and Visionary Insight. Another chapter is called Understanding Blake's Myth. So Blake had his own mythological world. This has a chapter on the Zoas. So this is to do with those 4 aspects of the divine that I was talking about before. There's a chapter called The Prophetic Call, because he was a prophet in a lot of ways. He did have prophetic writings. Then there's a chapter called Breakthrough to Apocalypse, because Blake did write about the Last Judgment. And I'll just have a look at what else is in here. There's a chapter here called Wrestling with God, which is very true. Especially in the second half of Blake's life. In the first half of his life, he was sort of more adamant about his ideas, but the second half of his life he became more reflective and he started to change or adjust some of his original thoughts and ideas. And then there's a chronology again of his life as well. There's notes, there's an index. I'm just going to go to the chapter that's called Wrestling with God. I'll give you an idea of what's in this chapter too. Let's put this down. For example, the chapter about wrestling with God, within that chapter, this author is talking about Jehovah and the Elohim. So as soon as you notice the Elohim, that is definitely to do with Kabbalah. And so also to do with the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days, it's to do with the Elohim. That's connected to the Elohim as well. And he also talks about the inspiration that Blake had to do with Book of Genesis as well. And it talks about how Blake was originally influenced by Swedenborg, but then he decided to form his own spiritual ideas. Talks about the Book of Revelation. So all of this is tying in with the Bible as well. So Blake was sort of influenced by esoteric ideas as well as the Bible. And this was his way of reconciling both of those things by interpreting, having his own interpretation of the Bible. So again, the four Zoas are in this chapter as well, called Wrestling with God. So all of that is, that just gives you an idea of what is in this particular chapter. It also talks about the Book of Urizen. The Book of Urizen was another aspect that was connected, or part of these aspects of the divine, which is to do with, it was really his own idea of the universe. That's the universe from a spiritual perspective. It mentions the background to the Ancient of Days in here. So this is a great book. This is also worth getting. This book is a great overview about Blake and his spiritual ideas as well as his art, but it's really the inspiration for his art and poems, but particularly the art. So this is a great book. Eternity's Sunrise, The Imaginative World of William Blake by Leo Damrosch. So that one's a bit more about the inspiration for the art, whereas the Portable Blake is particularly more about Blake's writings and poetry. And the third book I'm referring to is probably better known of the three books, which is William Blake by Kathleen Raine. Again, Ancient of Days on the cover. And this book has beautiful colour plates of Blake's art. This book is quite well known, and it's quite well respected. It gives a terrific, this has also got great black and white pictures in here of the Book of Job. So I hope I can show you some of this on here. You can see this. You can see this one. This one here. It's really great. This is all from the plates from Book of Job. The illustrations of the Book of Job. So that's a whole chapter on its own. So I'll just sort of read a little bit here where Kathleen Raine talks about here about the Job engravings. And she says here they are formalised in the manner of spiritual diagrams. One world opens from another. Those four worlds or regions of consciousness of Blake's own symbolic thought, derived from the Jewish esoteric tradition of the Kabbalah and the similar fourfold cosmology of Neoplatonism. So you can see just with that commentary there, Also, I'll just read this little bit too as well. Blake's illustrations of the Book of Job are more than an illustration of the Bible. They are in themselves a prophetic vision, a spiritual revelation, at once a personal testimony and replete with Blake's knowledge of Christian Kabbalah, Neoplatonism, and the mystical theology of the Western esoteric tradition as a whole. They are a complete statement of Blake's vision of man's spiritual drama. The true God as the God within, enthroned in every human soul, the human divinity. So, it also talks about the Zoas again. So one of them, for example, I'll give you an idea of the Zoas. One of them is called Thames, the sensual man, Luva, the man of feeling, and Urizen, the reasoner. And then there is the concept called Los, which is the poetic imagination who kept the divine vision in time of trouble. So this will give you an idea of, the spiritual ideas that are behind the artwork of William Blake, which was also part of his poetry as well. This is mainly about the artwork of William Blake and his spiritual theory and ideas behind that. So this is a great book. William Blake by Kathleen Raine. So they are the three main books that I wanted to show today, because these are the three books that are talking about Blake's spiritual and mystical ideas. And I'm calling this a video the Gnosis of William Blake, because it is really a Gnosis as well, because he was a visionary, he was prophetic, but he also did have visions. So these were his experiences of spiritual beings, of his concepts of God and the universe and angels, all these types of things. So it is the Gnosis of Blake. So I'm just also going to mention here the Book of Urizen. This was an idea of Blake's own interpretation of the creation of our world and the fall of humanity. That is the Book of Urizen. And he had his own theories, because he didn't agree entirely with the ideas that were presented in his time by organised Christianity, organised churches. So he wanted his own concept, not only the nature of the universe and the nature of what people call God. These were his own concepts of heaven. And he didn't see the universe as a perfect state. So that is very original as well. It's very original thinking in itself. And the Book of Laws retells the story of the creation and the fall. And I'm just having a look at some of a little bit of further notes here. Blake had quite a complex theology. I mean, I would rather call it a spirituality, but it is it's sort of thought of as a type of theology because spirituality wasn't really used as a term in those days, in his time. The other thing I need to mention here too is that he also had his own concept. It was a kind of like a Kabbalistic concept, because he also had an idea of the nature of a tenfold God. So the idea of emanation, which is also Kabbalah. So he had ideas of a tenfold divinity that was made up of what he called these things. Instead of calling them sephira, he called them eternals. So this tenfold divinity was made up of 4 masculine eternals and 4 feminine emanations. So there were 4 masculine eternals, and then there were 4 female emanations from there, and then a combined masculine eternal and corresponding feminine power. So, but you know, these were all a very individualistic spiritual theory of William Blake. And the Book of Urizen is kind of very Gnostic, because he was talking about the character of Urizen also being an initiator of the fall, and also as the creator of the fallen world. That is a very Gnostic concept. It really is. So there was Urizen, and then there was the other masculine eternals and all this type of thing. And then Blake also had an idea of a Christ figure as well, which he formulated that idea later in his life. So I hope this video today gives you some idea of some of the very Gnostic and spiritual ideas and the kind of mystical visions and mystical inspiration that explains the work of William Blake and his whole concept of what he called the eternal man. And the eternal man fits in with the image that I was showing earlier on in the video. The eternal, well, let's just say the eternal human. Okay, so that is a bit of a discussion, a bit of a talk about the mystical ideas of William Blake that informed and inspired the art and poetry and writings and ideas of William Blake. So I will put the details of the 3 books underneath the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.